Hello. Hi. My name is Brian Kim. I'm. This is a podcast. My podcast. I finally have a guest. It's been a very busy summer. I know that everybody's been going through a lot of different things. I've been kind of running my program, and that's been taking a lot of my time. But through the summer, I got to make some connections as things kind of, mellowed out with COVID. At the time, started to mellow out, but I met Henry Lowe. Turns out you're a very important person to Monterey Park, and I just want to say a few things here as per the website. So Henry has a history of public service that spans more than 20 years, from 03 to 2020. Served on the Garvey Elementary School School Board of Education, and as a board member and co-founder of the Garvey Education Foundation, and raised community support for schools in the district since '07. A prominent creating wait wait prominent of creating collaborative relationships between public agencies, and help develop academic partnerships between Garvey Elementary School District and East LA College. Between 2016 to 2020, Henry is appointed as the member of the City of Monterey Park's Economic Development Advisory Commission, in which his fellow commissioners provide an input on how to improve the city's economic climate. And since 1999, Henry has been an advocate for our communities in the state of California, and served as staff on several San Gabriel Valley state legislatures, including the state senator Gloria Romano, and state assemblyman Romero. Sorry, oops, Romero, and state assembly member Mike Ng. Currently he is a senior field representative for the district office for the state assembly member of Ed Chao. And Henry is the son of working class immigrants who came to California seeking the American dream. And he grew up as a latchkey kid, which while both his parents worked, and and was the first in his family to attend college. Received a bachelor degree in government from Colby College, and a master's in public administration degree in Cal State University Northridge. Ooh, we got a rival, Cal State LA here.
Oh.
Uh, Not in a rival in a personal sense, unless college is very personal. But is there anything that I missed from there? I know that's kind of took from verbatim from the Monterey Park City website, but is there anything else that you want our audience to know before we get into it?
No, I think that was a very nice introduction, and I think you touched upon some of my background as well as my personal life, and yeah, I mean, in my bio, I wanted to make sure that people knew that I was a latchkey kid, because I think that a lot of us who come from working class background, that was reality for many of us. That while our parents worked to put food on the table, to put a roof over our head, that oftentimes for many of us children of these working class parents, we had to, in a sense, grow up a little faster and fend for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So just for folks that don't understand Latchkey Kid, just to make sure, but Latchkey Kid is a child who remains in an empty home after school, or a child who often is left home unsupervised because the parents had to work away. So I just want to make sure, because I think some of these, it's in the age of TikTok. I think it best to probably explain some of these words, because I think we're aging out ourselves. So yeah,
I'm definitely aging myself.
so yeah, we're latchkey kids is that idea of you're unsupervised as a child. And I think to some degree I've kind of related to that, because it's often, I did had a parent at home, but at the same point they were working all the time as a seamstress, right? And a lot of the time, a lot of the main care would come through elder siblings, right? Older siblings. I'm the youngest of 6, so you imagine that my dad would be working in the restaurant while my mom would be working as a seamstress at home. And whenever it was school back home, and sometimes our oldest brother would make instant ramen or something like that. And so that
Right,
was kind of the
right,
dynamic.
right. And yeah, I mean, I totally can share very similar culinary backgrounds. Cup of ramen was very common because it was safe. Just put water in and stick it in the microwave, or else Swanson's chicken pot pie. It was very convenient. And again, all you have to just stick it in the microwave. And no, I mean, I would let myself into the house and make myself comfortable, and of course do my homework and wait till the parents came home, and in some cases actually start dinner before they came home. But I often tell people that it really is that upbringing that I had that I also think really molded and probably set the direction of why I do what I do, especially in public service, because I see how much my parents had to struggle, and sounds like your background very similar to mine, just to be able to get by. And my mother had an elementary school education. My father, I think, maybe middle school, and for the basic metrics that we may use, such as affording a home, sending your kid to college, you could say that perhaps my parents were successful, but they also, I think, were very lucky, because I often tell people that they came to this country at a time when there were still reasonably well-paying blue-collar jobs. I mean, yeah, my mom was a seamstress as well, worked at a factory in downtown. My dad was a machinist, but he started out working at a restaurant. But thanks to night school, the Evans Adult School in by Chinatown, they were able to get a certificate and become a machinist, and they worked very hard, but nonetheless still able to have some semblance of success. But I often tell people that if my parents were a young blue collar couple today, I don't think they would have the same opportunities, because of the way in which the economy has evolved, it's shifted, and even when we talk about housing and how expensive it is. I mean, I often like to make the observation that the house that my parents bought now, actually almost 40 years ago, if they were a blue collar worker today, they probably would not be able to afford it because inflation's gone so high in housing.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to start by asking you, given everything that you explained, well, like what was kind of like the catalyst that brought you into city governance or brought you into public work? Like, what was your origin stories? Usually, I ask this question, especially when I'm talking to any
Yeah,
civic leader. So, what was kind of like that
yeah.
that catalyst moment for you?
You know, I would have to say, if I were to go back in time, I would definitely say probably um, middle school, where I came to kind of self-actualization that we were a blue collar background, and that we also were very fortunate that eventually, although I did start in the beginning out of the Latchkey Kid, but as I got older, we were able to find after school programming that provided tutoring and like snacks that were nutritious, and also recreational activities. But I think I was very fortunate because not every elementary school offered these type of programs. I grew up in the East Side. I was born in Chinatown, and then my parents then moved a little further east to Lincoln Heights, in which they had an apartment, and then eventually they bought a home in the El Sereno area. But yeah, at an early age, I understood that my parents had to struggle, and my mom, of course, would tell me that your father and I, we're not rich people, and we have to work hard to what we have. But I think as I got older, I mean, so of course there was that self-realization about my own circumstances. But then I think as I got older, especially in high school, yeah, there were definitely moments I would pinpoint as where I developed that consciousness about issues in the community. And I would say probably for me, it was in high school in which I witnessed and experienced the LA riots or the LA uprising because as I mentioned, I grew up in Los Angeles. I attended school, middle school and elementary school in the El Sereno area, which is on the east side. But because anyone that's familiar with Los Angeles Unified School District knows that the district has a expansive magnet program. And so my parents, who wanted me to get well, in their view, a better education, had me apply to a magnet school that was much further away than where I live. And it meant, getting up at 6:30 in the morning to catch a school bus. But I attended a magnet school called LACES, which is an acronym for the Los Angeles Center for Enriched Studies on Fairfax on 18th Street. But going back to the LA uprisings, yeah, I mean, it was that moment that there's so many issues that kind of came together as a nexus, issues that we still talk about today, such as police brutality, and also the grievances that come from being in communities that have been systemically oppressed, and also the impact of that uprising, because I remember probably 2 days after the rioting, well, I'm sorry, a week probably after the rioting had finished and it was safe to go back to school. Our school bus would just go through, Venice, Pico, and it was like a war zone. And a lot of my friends, especially those who were in the Koreatown community, had their livelihoods or businesses that they scraped together to put together, just literally burn up in smoke. And the days after, in which we came back to school, they would put us in discussion groups, just for everyone to talk about what they were feeling, what they're processing, and certainly, you had a lot of raw emotions about what had occurred, of seeing one's community burn up, but also, again, grievances about, why were people uprising? Is because people were living in just impoverished circumstances, and that it was unfortunate that other communities had to suffer the brunt of it, communities that were themselves just as marginalized as others.
Mm-hmm.
And really what one concludes is that, as those who come from marginalized communities of color, working class communities, it's unfortunate that the brunt of the LA uprising was felt in communities of color, in working class communities. And for me, at that point, I think it became clear to me that, there was a lot of inequality in our system, and that it was unfortunate that the system pits communities that are marginalized against each other to compete and fight for crumbs. And so probably that was very pivotal for me to have experienced and to know people who were impacted very deeply, and it's interesting too, because I know, I mean, it's now been nearly 3 decades since the LA uprising, and I find it interesting also to talk to younger people about it, because I realize, for many who are younger, they just read about it in textbooks, but I tell people, look, I experienced it. I saw it firsthand. I mean, from my high school, I could see people looting stores a block away, and then having those conversations. And in many ways, a lot of those issues that gave rise to the LA uprising, they still exist today, and maybe in some cases they're even more exacerbated. And so have we made some progress? I would say yes, but we still have a long way to go. And so I think at least that was one moment in my early life that made me really at least socially conscious.
Mm-hmm. Uh, to follow up, I actually do have more questions about your how you got into public service,
Mm-hmm.
in schools and that. But I did, since you brought up the LA uprisings of '92, I've had a discussion with my coworkers and like my students of like like there's these cycles of violence almost. It was through the issue of Latasha Harlins and the cruel beating of Rodney King that
Right.
something like this happened. And in terms of the conversation of Latasha Harlins, like my point and my question is that I think that there's an awesome this new consciousness of like asking for solidarity, bringing that solidarity to bear between communities. But in that history of the Korean community was put as a wedge between the Black and the white community, and then even when those businesses were being destroyed, like the police wasn't even going to be there for them, and I think the main idea of that question is that is it are we still having as Asian Americans having tough conversations about solidarity, like to some degree a lot of people have benefited through that idea of model minority and may not see that there's some privileges to that put them in between other communities of colors. I want to see if like maybe you have some thoughts and given the
Right.
context of like it's been 30 years, it's been 92, it's almost 2022, by next
Yeah.
year. So I think that's a tough question that I want to bring to the table, because I think in the conversation of
Sure.
race and in the conversation of solidarity, I think we should and have to have these tough conversations about, does solidarity make sense if there's not an acknowledgement of the history
Right.
of
Well,
yeah.
let me just say, from my observation, my perspective, and no, actually, thank you for bringing that question up, because it is something that I do think about as an Asian American, and especially in this past year in which we've seen the rise of anti-Asian hate, and also the question of how do we build coalition and find commonality, common ground. But I mean, I think as a community, and as you know, as the API, we are not one monolithic community, but I think we do have to have some of these hard conversations, these introspections, because when I see, for example, Asian Americans like last year rallying in opposition to Prop 16, to restore affirmative action and bring equity in our system, especially in higher education, or that there are Asian Americans who are part of this opposition to critical race theory. And I think it's because there are some Asian Americans who I think have been seduced into this idea of, yes, the model minority, and that some APIs think we're just maybe just a generation or two from being successful and basically white, and aspire to that ideal of success, and therefore they don't need to um, um, be part of other coalitions. And I think, as we both said earlier, that that's the fallacy, because again, we are letting those who are in control of the system, again, use our community as a wedge with other communities. And I think that's where we do need to have these very difficult, courageous, and also important conversations, is that, and actually, I think what this past year has demonstrated in my mind is that, you know what, APIs may think we're a model minority, and we may think that as long as our kids go to, say, UC Berkeley or to Stanford and Harvard, and therefore the whatever ceilings, bamboo glass ceilings, they are gone, and we'll join the rest of mainstream America. But as this past year has demonstrated, you know what, um, we are still viewed by many as perpetual foreigners, and doesn't matter if we are successful materially, financially. Many people still view us as perpetual foreigners, conveyors of disease, viruses, or examples of economic displacement, because of globalization. And I think that's where, as a community of APIs, I hope that we take this past year. Of course, we fight for our own rights and our own recognition. Because no community should be scapegoat. But also at the same time, I would hope also takes us time to also be introspective and think about how we can help others, because when you help others, you help yourself as well.
Right. And yeah, it's tough, bringing that conversation to bear, well, with elders in our community, and it's tough, because I think it's, for some of us, like we've got that success, right? We've got some form of privilege. We got some form of measure to be comfortable, right? But that's not the same thing for all Asian communities, right? Like, when
Right.
you say Asian American, then what are you really saying, right? I think most people have this notion that it is the East Asian, the Chinese,
Right.
the Japanese, the Korean, but that, and within that form of within that word of Asian, there is South Asian, Southeast Asian, as
Right.
like I'm Cambodian. So like
Right.
in that demographic, right? Like, we even have populations in the Khmer community that's being deported, right? That was this big thing before the pandemic happened, that Gavin Newsom pardoned several Cambodian Americans, because they've already served their time in their debt to society. Why deport them, right? And so we have similar stories, and I think we miss those stories of solidarity, if like there's people in power or people within that community that says, oh no, like our numbers are very high, we don't have poverty, there's no such thing as poverty within the Asian American community. But the reality is there is issues, and to ignore it means that we'll be ignorant to it. And I think that's where I stand.
And not only ignoring it, but also there are those in our community, in the API community, who also find it an inconvenient truth that yes, there are communities in the API community that have socioeconomic challenges, and if anything, they would rather to have those issues swept under the rug in favor of maintaining this very false idea about this mono-minority myth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So going back to the question of city governance and kind of your history and your background. So
Sure.
what got you to Monterey Park initially? Was it a family move, or you just kind of worked up to it, lived in Monterey Park for a while, saw that you could have done there is some point of it where it's like, oh, I could do it better. That's my idea. If I ever became into city governance, is that there's this notion it's like, I could do it better. So what got you into Monterey?
Right. Well, let me try, and I know we were discussing my early life, and I guess let me try and also add to my early upbringing. So we started in which we talked about those pivotal moments. One of them was being in high school during the LA uprising, and I think that probably college was also very pivotal and eye-opening, and probably really, I think, was important in, I think, forming my worldview. But and as you said in your bio, I attended a college called Colby College, which is a liberal arts college in the state of Maine. And it's in the Northeast, it's New England, and it's they call like one of the mini Ivies. And if you ever visit New England, there are a lot of good liberal arts colleges, like Williams and Mount Holyoke, and Colby was one of them. But for me, it was really eye-opening because, and I tell people often that it was not until college that I actually really understood that, oh, I'm really poor, and oh, actually I'm a person of color, because although yes, I had again that self realization because where I grew up, and also the things I experienced. But if anyone goes up in a large urban area like Los Angeles, it's a diverse megalopolis, and especially because it's so sprawled out, you could be living in a sprawling community of similar socioeconomic backgrounds.
Mhm.
And it was down to college that I really met like really wealthy people, like people who went to boarding schools, or and the school I attended. And I, I don't want to knock Kobe because actually I received an excellent education, but it was also very homogenous. The school at that time was, I think, 95% Caucasian, meaning that only 5% of students were people of color. And it was a smaller college, like I think
Mhm.
1,300 students was the total enrollment. And so that meant that there was less than 100 students who were people of color. And we all kind of knew each other. And so it was definitely a eye-opening experience for me. And I think in the process of trying to build an identity, especially in a place like that, you get more involved. And in my case, I got involved in some local club. Like we actually had an Asian American club, which I was involved in, as well as the local College Democratic Club. But I think also probably what was also very character building was I also became part of a coalition of students of color that demanded that our college have a cultural center, as a safe space for people of color like myself. And what was interesting was that I think that for the rest of the student community, they didn't understand, like, well, why do you need a space like that? You should be lucky because you got a chance to go to this college, implying that somehow we were only let in because we were students of color, and that we didn't come in our own merits. And I think really that's where you have to like find in yourself, your voice to say, look, number one, I earned every right to attend this college,
Mhm.
and as anyone else. But number two, you know, I'm not here just to be a diversity, just to something to check off in your diversity checklist.
Mhm.
But if you want me to thrive, if you want students like myself, who come from working class backgrounds, from urbanized areas, to thrive in a school like this, where it's in a homogenous campus and a very homogenous state, then you need to also provide the student services. And I think it was, I mean, in retrospect now, I realize now that probably was where I learned early on, when we talk about today as community advocacy and
Mhm.
and demanding equity and resources. And really, if I look back of that movement I was involved in, that really was probably a lot of the struggles we hear today. But I think it was that moment that I also learned that, if you want anything, especially in a system that doesn't necessarily value your opinions or think that you need any resources, then you really need to then raise your voice and also organize. And so I think that college actually was very character building.
Mhm.
And again, I don't mean to say somehow that my college is an awful place. I actually, I mean, it was character building, but I still will say that, look, I did get a great education and I attended a very good school, and certainly I still have fond memories of attending college.
Yeah, and it's not like it's like a full tilt negative, right? It's like sometimes it's in the criticism where you hope that these education places learn from, right? Like it's not like it's all bad, right? And I think it's I guess it's just my idea of like being an American. It's all often that it's questioning. It's like a criticism. I think James Baldwin had that. It's like constantly questioning. Is the organized community that I prescribe myself into, are they looking out for my own best interests? And if not, where can I find that? Right. and that's like a constant questioning of the idea of the American ideal, the American dream. Um, um, Building on that, I did want to ask you, there's always like the best parts and kind of like things that could have been better, and I guess I'm just dancing around by saying negative, but like what are some of the highlights of working in city governance, and what are some of the lowlights of it, like,
Sure.
yeah, and I imagine that there's going to be a lot of takes, especially in a year and a half of COVID. So, the floor is all yours for this one.
Sure. Well, yeah, and yes, you did allude to the pandemic, and I was elected in March of 2020, actually right before the pandemic was declared, and I still remember um, had that Thursday after the election, and of course I was very excited that I was elected to city council, and I remember on Thursday having dinner with some friends, and even then we were talking amongst ourselves and asking ourselves, how long do you suppose this healthcare is going to be? Like maybe a few weeks, and be back to normal, and then of course the following week is when the World Health Organization declared the pandemic, and then I think by the end of March is when the county just started declaring stay-at-home orders, and that's when it really hit me that, oh, this is serious. And what's interesting is that when one campaigned, of course, you have a platform of what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, and certainly, I had my goals, but I think when we were all sworn in April, we realized the world had changed, and now the question was, how do we make sure that our community is safe and that we are doing our part to stem this pandemic? And so it certainly was a trial by fire. But I guess back to your original question about good and bad. Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, I served on the Garvey Elementary School Board, and so I was a school board member actually for 17 years before coming onto the city council. And although I had experience in local government, but it was really was one issue, which was education. And I think after becoming a council member, what I realized is that the issues you get to work on, you make decisions on, it's an enormous opportunity. I mean, you have opportunities to affect issues like housing and the environment, workforce issues, infrastructure, and so that's a wonderful opportunity. But also, if there is I don't use a downside, but if there is I guess well, yeah, I guess downside is that at the same time your expectation from community is broader. Your community expects you to be responsive, available on any issues that is the jurisdiction of the local municipal government. And and actually, if I could also segue further back to again the question in the beginning about how I got into what into my career. I think especially after college, at that point, I decided that I really wanted to have, if I could, involvement in my own community, especially after taking my experiences of growing up as a latchkey kid for working class blue collar immigrants, experiencing as early as high school, observing racial inequality and systems of oppression, and then in college, also learning the importance of organizing and speaking one's voice, and so I think that's how I came to that conclusion about the career I wanted. And I think I do believe I'm very lucky because I after college I came back to LA, and first of all I needed a job, and so I got a job working at a law firm in Century City because I just thought it's a job, and I actually at that time thought, oh, maybe I'll go to law school. And so I was actually studying for the LSAT. But, serendipity often takes you in different directions because um, I remember it was probably in summer of 1998 that I'd been a year out of college, and I thought, well, this is not exactly what I want to do, but I suppose at least I have my first job and I'm paying bills. But then I saw an opportunity to also volunteer, and that's what I did. I got involved with the California Democratic Party, and again, I got some involvement with Democratic Party politics in college, with our college Democratic Club and other clubs, as I mentioned. But it was my involvement with the California Democratic Party that you would say put me in the path where I am now, because eventually they actually offered me a job. And being 22, it's like, well, I'm not wedded to any career job yet. So I actually worked for the state party in 1998. That was when Ray Davis ran for governor, and it was my eyes were open to California politics. And when the campaign was over, they helped me get a job for a new assembly member that was elected to the San Gabriel Valley, and that was Gloria Romero, who would later become Senator Gloria Romero. And I've now worked for 3 legislators in the same area in the West San Gabriel Valley, and I really consider myself very fortunate and lucky that I actually have established roots in this part of Los Angeles County, this region. And eventually I decided to move out of my parents' house and move into the community I worked in. And so I actually moved into an apartment in Rosemead, my first place actually. And again, I think this also speaks to the importance of being involved, because certainly I was visible because of my job, but also because I tried to get also involved in my own community that I lived in as well. And eventually, I had some parents and some teachers in the Garvey School District who asked, "Hey, would you like to run for school board?" Which at the time I thought, well, that seems crazy, because as you know, I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to LA Unified, and I thought, well, I have no business running for school board. But then, after careful consideration, I also realized the community that district represented was probably same community that I grew up in, same family that I grew up in, which were working class immigrants. Many times they were first in their family. And I often think about how the advantages and opportunities I had in the school that I attended, and I've also came to realization that I think I do have something to share with my stories and also my background, because for a lot of working class families, a lot of newcomers, college is the reason why people come to the United States. And good public schools is that pathway to that American dream. And that's something that I did embrace very much, which is probably why I spent 17 years on the school board. And it really has been a labor of love, really trying to raise the visibility of the school district and to try and build those partnerships you mentioned, to bring resources to families that probably have the same story as mine. I definitely will look back on my almost 2 decades on the Garvey School Board with a lot of fond memories, and hope that I did accomplish some good things. But digressing back to the state council, yeah, I was elected last year, and it has been, I think, a very exciting opportunity, because I look at it this way: the term is only 4 years, and that 4 years means you have only a finite amount of time. And as I said, there are a lot of good opportunities to learn issues, to also do your part to, I think, address the issue that you see as important in this community. I mean, as I see it, issues that I think also drove what I do as a school board member, and again, issues of equity. And we touched upon it in different aspects in our conversation about, how do we make sure that people can afford to buy a home, especially like the children or grandchildren who grew up in this community. what can we do as a city to help upward mobility when it comes to workforce development, um, climate change, environment? How do we make sure that we have livable communities, sustainable communities, and that we are also good stewards, so that we are addressing the challenges we see in our environment and globally in the world. And so, to your question about good and bad, I think, again, as I said, it's a great. What is exciting about being a council member is that I get to work on a lot of issues. But what if there is any downside is that I'm also put in different directions, and people have expectations of you to be focused on all their issues, and that could be 20 or 30 issues, and try and do it in a way that hopefully people will be satisfied, and also that if there are any policy enactments, that is something that actually helps people.
That being said, it sounds like you've had a lot on your plate for many years. Like you've had a history about almost 2 decades of like working in community work. How this is going to go back to an idea of, or a question of, the violence against the AAPI community. But like back then, it's like when everything had happened in Atlanta, I was in a very bad headspace. You know, it's like I've been advocating, I've been talking to communities, and I've been addressing the issue of race with students. And you know, we still have these tragedies where it like knocks you onto the floor, right? And so, that being said, how have you like you know, kept balance, or you know, help manage stress in tough times? And I think this might be a good moment to like, you know, recognize that. I think there's a hum of stress that lingers with many families, and especially families in the LA County area. You know, you have COVID, you have you know, looming evictions, you have homeless and houselessness crisis right now. So how would you go about, you know, managing that stress?
Hmm, that's a good question. um, well, I mean, at a very personal level, you know, I think that yes, self-care is important. And you know, a friend once said something to me which I've always remembered and taken to heart, is that you can't help other people unless you also help yourself. And that's true, because if you have a lot of stress that's been internalized because of what you're seeing in the world, or what's immediately out your door in your community or in your work, then it does take its toll. And so I think that I think I was very fortunate that I had support of my friends and my family. And you know, although there were moments where during those first few months of the pandemic, we were just under lockdown, but I guess that's where we learned the convenience of using Zoom, like we're talking right now.
Right.
And I also probably came to really appreciate the fact that in my community, we have a lot of good recreational spaces. In Monterey Park, we actually have 13 parks in the city. In fact, there's one around the corner from my house. And I think that I learned to really appreciate having access to recreational spaces. But having said that, also realizing that not every community has that opportunity, that resource, because we know, especially in Southern California, Los Angeles is one of those urbanized areas. And that's something that also I've thought a lot about as a council member, is that as much as I just said that, you know, Monterey Park is blessed to have 13 parks, we could always do better, because we know that, especially in the pandemic, having recreational spaces, green spaces, to, you know, have those moments of meditation, to, you know, go for something as basic as a walk, that art is really important. And you're right, you know, it has been a pressure cooker. I mean, in my case, in many ways, it's just been go 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 because um, um, the moment I was sworn in, we had challenges every council meeting. How do we make sure that those who are struggling to get those utilities paid, there's assistance. How do we make sure that we are working with the county to help those that are vulnerable? Monterey Park was actually home to two Pajurunki sites during the pandemic. And if you're not familiar with Pajurunki, that was a program of the county in which they worked with local hotels to find sheltering for those who are vulnerable, such as the elderly or those who have compromised pre-existing health issues. And unfortunately, I would say probably that was my first month in office. That was probably my first real challenge because there was a lot of opposition in our community in Monterey Park. And then again, really unfortunate that was because I think that, and I think what I'm talking about is that when it comes to homelessness, there's still a stigma behind it, and unfortunately, a lot of I think ignorance and a lot of prejudices directed at those who are homeless and about the issue of why you're homeless. And so it was, I would say the first few months have been very challenging as a council member and also in my day job as well. I currently work at the district office of Assemblymember Ed Chao, and I would say that in the past year, I jokingly say this, but it's also a very accurate description to say that I think I've become an extension of the unemployment office because we've had so many constituents who come to us, probably in the hundreds, if not in the thousands, who are in need of help to get their benefits because they have bills to pay. They're at risk of having the power shut off, or before the eviction moratorium being thrown out of their homes. And we've all read about the mess that EDD is in, and for those of us who work in district office of state legislators, we have probably spent the past year trying to be an advocate for those who are struggling to get their benefits. And so it can be overwhelming. And I think for me, to answer your question, how have I coped? It's funny when I think about it. In many ways, it's almost like you don't have time. You just keep going. But I do want to also say that I think I've been fortunate that I've had, as I said, good friends and supportive family that has also been there for me when I did need it. Just to check in to make sure that I was okay. And also, as I mentioned, that where I live, I think I've been very fortunate to also have these safe, clean recreational spaces to just be outdoors and take a moment. And also, I think I mentioned before we started that, if you hear any pitter patter, it's because I have a dog, and having a pet really does help me. I've had a dog for now 8 years now, and so, but certainly, my dog Mia has been very, I think, probably important in helping me decompress and de-stress, and probably also why during the pandemic you saw an incredible upsurge in people adopting pets from shelter. Then I do hope that many of these people who adopted pets from these shelters, once we do go back to some normalcy, people don't return those pets back to the shelter, because I think that'd be really fortunate because I mean these animals unconditionally were there for us, and I hope that as humans we also appreciate that and provide forever homes for these pets.
Yeah, so definitely forever homes.
Humane Society.
Well, I know I know it's almost time, but I would be remiss to if I did not get this question out. I did want to at least ask a question that that has a little bit of a story in the middle. But Monterey Park has in the mid the 2010s was like touted as like one of the first cities in California to be majority Asian American, right? To be majority of that both in the city council and in the city population, like a reflection of its own governance, right? I did want to ask this question though. Given everything that happened throughout the pandemic, even before Atlanta, right? Even before that, how has Monterey Park coped with, the rise of Asian hate, and what have you been hearing from your community about this issue? And yeah, I don't know if that's going to be the last question, but I just want to hear you out. I want to hear what you've been hearing.
Sure. Well, and thanks for actually setting up that historic background about Monterey Park. For those who are familiar with this city, we've actually been written up in academia because we are considered the first city in the continental United States with a majority of Asian population. And yeah, I mean, there is a very well-known book, I think if you ever take a class on Asian American Studies, called Monterey Park, the First Suburban Chinatown. And so we do have an important place in history. And also Monterey Park was also ground zero in the 80s for that English only movement. And what that is that I believe in the mid 80s, the city council at that time and the leaders at that time didn't like the changes they were seeing. They saw their community changing because of the influx of Asian Americans, and they tried to stop it by doing something as malicious as saying, science going to be in English, and essentially trying to not even appreciate the advantages by having a community that is multilingual. But from that moment, and in the 80s, though, you also saw a community that organized itself against, institutionalized prejudice and bigotry, and actually, one of those people that was an activist and has now become a very important leader in our community is actually Congresswoman Judy Chu, because Judy, who lived in Monterey Park with her husband Mike Ging, they were there. They were in that ground zero in that period in the 80s, and they were community activists. And from their activism, they themselves embarked on a journey of public leadership, public service, and to where she is now. Judy Chu, is now first Chinese American woman in Congress and a very important figure in our community, along with her husband Mike Ging, who also was an assembly member. But as far as this past year, it was gratifying to see our community organize in rallies to stand up and say we won't tolerate the acts of violence against our community. And what I have been very, it's been so gratifying to see a lot of the organizing is by young people, and I think that's it's so I think it's so easy, especially because when you want to get so busy in your work, to forget about really how important it is to have that pipeline and to supporting the next generation. And so, I remember attending rallies organized by young people in this community on anti-API hate. And that really gives me a lot of optimism is that, from this activism, we're also going to see people get involved in the local community as well. One thing that I do want to add to is that although I know your question is about API issues, but also, this past year in Monterey Park, we actually organized our first LGBT Pride March. And that's something that I really, I'm so proud of because, well, first of all, I am Monterey Park's first openly gay council member. And so certainly, I want to make sure that the city that prides itself as being a city of inclusion, or at least having history of fighting for inclusion, that, that also includes the LGBT community. But I bring it up also because when we did our Proud March, I was so amazed, impressed to see that most of the people who came out to our march were high school students. And I think that is just that gives me a lot of hope that again, back to your question about how has our community responded. It really gives me a lot of hope that to see millennials and Gen Z organize and say, number one, we're not going to stand up for hate, but number two, we also are not going to stand for the institutional racism and oppression that gave rise to the type of hate we saw, and that we demand from our policymakers at all levels, from local to state and federal, that when all is said and done, when the rallies are done, that we also look at how do we make substantive, a policy changes to address those issues.
Yeah, that's what I've saw and like I've observed over my time. I think that the thing that got me back was seeing that effort of young people, seeing that the fire in their belly to address these issues. And there was a comment made when me and a former coworker of mine, we saw the candlelight vigil at Amanza Park in Alhambra. And they were saying, it's like, this is kind of rough, but I said I had the perspective of like, someone in this crowd can be the next AOC, somebody in this crowd can be the next leader that can go directly to a community and address those issues within those communities. And it may be rough now, but I'm glad that these first time organizers, first time college students were able to say, you know what, we need to do at least something. We want to heal, we want to bring in the space for people to grieve, and I think we were all kind of collectively grieving. And and it does show, like Monterey Park having its first Pride March. I wasn't able to go, as mentioned, when we were meeting in person that one time, but I wish I did. I wish I didn't miss that march. But yeah, it long story short, it is kind of that young energy that kind of hold us accountable, but have them be kind of like the future of these communities. Yeah,
and my hope too is that for those who do hold these policy positions, be it city council, state assembly, state senate, or Congress, U.S. Senate, that we harness that energy that we see from young people, and also take seriously, because the decisions we have made in the past do impact the next generation.
So if you have just a few moments, I know we could talk for about like hours, and I want to be very, very respectful of your time, but I just want to do this last little bit or segment. I'm just gonna lay out just kind of a few things that have gone through like the news, or like many cities are going through right now, and I would want you, as your own city council self, to give your own grade score, right? You could be as brutally honest or as hopeful as you want to be, but I'm just gonna run off like maybe about 5 different issues that pertain to like our LA area. So just give yourself a grade level from A to F, sort of thing. So issues on homelessness.
Well, I would say C-. And do I have a time can I explain why? But
just in a few words, because this is kind of like a lightning round situation.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, let's go. Okay, minus. Actually, D plus C minus when it comes to homelessness.
D plus C minus. On the area of economics.
I would say a C.
In the area of education.
I would say between a C and a B.
In terms of infrastructure, buildings and roads.
C.
and in terms of green spaces and dealing with issues of the environment?
C minus.
C minus. You know what? That is very. You know, it's kind of rare. A lot of folks would probably be like A's across the board, but I think it shows that I think there's more to be done in terms of
Oh yes.
like works like working in a city. There's always more to be done. So
Oh, absolutely.
thank you.
Absolutely. In fact, I would even say anyone that
Mhm.
says A and B, I'm like, really?
Yes, thank you again, Henry, for agreeing to be on this podcast.
Sure.
I'm always humbled whenever anybody, says yes to being part of this, and especially those that work in city governance, right? You know, like I've somehow ended up interviewing like people like Sasha Renee Perez and like community leaders like Eric Sonata and like even like tenants unions and all of these things. And I'm always grateful for people that to come down and at least have a conversation. And before that, do you want to let anybody know how to get a hold of you or follow you if you have social media or any of those things?
Sure. Well, let's see. Let me. Well, let's see. If anyone wants to email me, as a council member, they can send me an email at hlow@montereypark.ca.gov. I am on social media. I think you can just type in Henry Low for Monterey Park, and you'll see my Facebook page. And let's see. I'm also on Instagram. I believe my Instagram handle is HenryLow626. And so there's a couple ways you can get a hold of me. Or you could certainly also call City Hall. Oh, actually, if you go to the city's webpage and under City Council members, you can actually, under each of our names, click and you can, and it'll open a inbox. And so anyone that wants to get in touch with me, with me and wants to shoot me an email, they can certainly go to the webpage and click, and there will be a box in which you can type a message to me.
Awesome. I'll put all relevant sorry, it's been a long day, relevant links in our description, and we'll have another podcast one day. We'll have a longer one, a deeper discussion on many of the issues that are going
Oh,
through.
absolutely. And you're right, we could probably spend 2 hours. and so, well, you know what, as you said, this is an opportunity for me to come back to the show and maybe talk more about specific issues.
All right, awesome, thank you. All right, bye everybody.